Good morning. My name is Reverend Tom Capo. And I am the minister here at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Miami, or as we affectionately call it, UU Miami. Let us remember as we begin our service today that we walk and work and worship on lands that were once the Miccosukee, Tequesta, and Seminole tribal lands. I want to wish everyone a happy Mother's Day. And as I say that, I have to wonder, who are the mothers in our lives? Are they someone who gave birth, or someone who has mothered another person? So let us take time today to recognize that we all come from so many different places, as do our mothers. We come from joy and delight, wistfulness and longing and worry, unmet needs and unfulfilled dreams, loss and sorrow, loss and emptiness, loss and regret. All that life is made of, mothers are made of too. Today we sing the songs of so many. Mothers who are single parents, foster parents, mothers who relinquish their young out of necessity, mothers of the Spirit who gave freely and unconditionally to those people they called their children, mothers who found their heart in adoption, mothers who left their children in 1,000 ways, mothers who rejoice, and mothers who mourn. We sing the songs of the grandmother, the auntie, the classroom teacher, the Sunday school teacher, the babysitter, the neighbor with endless cookies all the time. There's a kind of love we cannot live without. And it's never too late, no matter our age or situation, to sing the song of gratitude for our mothers, of those who have known us, cherished us, found the wonder in us on this Mother's Day. My friends, there are so many stories that we hold inside, and only some that we share with others. Stories of our lives, our experiences, even stories about our mothers, whomever they were and however they came into our lives. Do you want to? Okay. We have a story, and it was written by this lovely author, Pepe. And over here is the microphone for you. And we have it printed here if you'd like.
Oh, you have it. Better than my iPhone.
You can take your mic. Yeah.
I'd like to preface this story, which is sad and poignant, with the fact that I don't remember my mother this way, even though when I reread it, it chokes me up and might choke you up. But I remember her very happily. She was an Afghan maker, and she made Afghans for everyone. And I have 2 of them on the foot of my bed, and every night I say, "Hi, Mom," and I bring it over me, even if it's hot. So, this is called A Mango for Mimo. It is summer and mango season. She sits staring as I walk in with the mangoes. The look is as blank as flat concrete. I steel myself with the shearing force of the shell that my mother has become. She may take my hand and say my name, or she may say, "Who is this? This place isn't for you. Go home." With all the Alzheimer patients I've had in my family practice, you would think I would be prepared for this turmoil. Having her at home seemed the right thing to do after her adoring new husband of 3 years could not care for her. She had called me daily at the office saying he was trying to kill her. I had to baby-proof the house as though a toddler lived there. She was up all night wandering around. Medications for sleep made her stagger. Those for agitation made her nauseated. She often thought I was trying to harm her. Once she came at me and grabbed my face with her fingernails, twisting my cheek like a cat fight among girls. I screamed for my husband, unwilling to fight my tiny mother. A minute later, she hugged me and told me how much she loved me. What blessed forgetfulness. This was my sweet mother who had kissed my forehead when I was a child and who told and retold a story of how I was burning up with fever as I was bundled off to the hospital, aged 4, temperature 106 degrees Fahrenheit. I had typhoid fever when there was no treatment for it. Several children in that mini epidemic on Miami Beach had died. Some of you may remember that are old enough and that have lived here for so long. That's not part of the story. And she kept saying to my father, "What if she dies? What if she dies?" And every time she told the story, tears would softly stream into her eyes, but she held them back so they never fell onto her cheeks. These days, my mother often looks at me with expressions identical to those that when she was normal. I look into her eyes and can no longer fathom the blankness I know is there. It is the mirror of the piercing stare of a newborn who seems to know what you are thinking. I am learning what the families of my patients come to know while they are suffering. They are doing their grief work in advance. I bring her mangoes, her favorite fruit, mine too. "Do you know what I brought you, Mimo?" I ask. She was renamed Mimo by a grandchild long ago. "Why do you ask such a stupid question?" she says. "I don't know and I don't care." She does not recognize the mangoes. "Remember how Daddy used to plant fish heads under the mango tree to fertilize it?" I ask. This is one of our favorite family secrets. She pushes the mango away. I go to the kitchen of the house where she lives and peel a mango, fighting the same tears she always fought. I admonish myself, this is not about you. This is about her. I bring the plate of mangoes with a fork. She will not touch them. I force a jolly smile and pierce a piece of mango, bringing it to her lips, as she must have done for me when I was an infant. She licks it, then opens her mouth like a little bird. She knows the mango. She takes the fork, a smile spreading over her face. She gobbles down the plate of mangoes, grinning as the juice runs down her chin. My mother was a no-nonsense practical lady, but she was sentimental. She was cute and quick and had written a book of poetry that she refused to call by that name. She called it verse and said she was a versifier, not a poet. Some verses were one-liners. Quote, "Life is dress rehearsal for which there will never be an opening night." Close quote. She could not have known how slowly and painfully the curtain would descend and that the theater would be empty before the stage lights would finally go out. Until then, I will bring her mangoes or whatever else is in season.
I want to start by sharing a passage from a book that I've been reading lately, A Tale of Boxes, The Role of Myth in Creating and Changing Our Lives, by Robert T. Latham. It goes like this. Jack and Jill went up the hill to catch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Jack is a story. Jill is a story. The hill is a story. Going up the hill is a story. Fetching is a story. The pail is a story. The water is a story. Jack falling is a story. Breaking his crown is a story. And Jill tumbling is also a story. All these smaller stories make up the larger story of this nursery rhyme. You see, everything that exists is a story. And every story is a tale of encounter with other stories. My story is what I create from the meaning I give to my experiences. And our stories forever mingle together. My friends, we all tell stories. And each story we tell has at least part of us in it. Whether it's a personal story or a fable or a myth or a historical reenactment. And each story, well, it leaves us with questions, feelings, thoughts. Stories affect us, remind us, change us in subtle and sometimes profound ways. And the best stories, well, they stay with us long after we've heard them. Stories, particularly stories about mothers and mothering, touch something deep within us. Something ineffable, something that can be paradoxical and complicated. Our birth mothers are our first physical connection with another human being. Often it is from our birth mothers that we have our initial experience of security, connection, support, love. However flawed any or all of those might be and often are. And besides our birth mothers, there are people in our lives who give us mothering. We'll call them our spiritual mothers, for lack of a better word. They get to know us. They cherish us. They find in us what is special and wonderful and joyful and to be affirmed. And they usually come into our lives at a critical moment. At least that's been my experience. The stories of mothers in our lives often influence our sense of worth, our understanding of love, how deeply we can trust. Because these stories are so deep and impactful in our lives, when a mother changes, whether through aging or other reasons, and our relationship with them changes, and our stories about them change. I was particularly touched by the story that Pepe allowed us to hear today. She shared a story of how her relationship with her biological mother changed. I wonder, as you listened, how did you feel? What did you think? What did you experience from the story? Did you think of your own mother or of someone in your life who mothered you? Or of your own mothering of someone in your life? Did some of your own stories of mothers or mothering begin to fill your mind and heart as you listened? That's what happened to me when I first read this story. Memories. I remembered a time when my mother calmly and with great practicality took care of me when an edger cut off 2 of my toes. I was crying out of control in shock, not knowing what to do. I ran around the block to her. Despite my panic, I knew she was the one who could take care of me. She wrapped my foot with my almost completely severed toes, stopped the bleeding, and took me immediately to the doctor. Of course, he reattached my toes and put my whole leg in a cast. I still don't understand that. But my mother came through practically, calmly, as she always did. She was just that kind of person. And I remembered how my mother loved me even when I did things, let's say, were a little dangerous or scary. After a long day in the cow fields near my home, I brought back a black racer snake in a pillowcase. I thought I'd keep it, as a pet. But I needed something to put it in. And I found my father's crab trap. I thought, well, that'd work. Despite the fact that the spaces between the boards in the crab trap were much wider than the snake itself. As I was in process of doing this, my mother wondered what I was doing. And she came out the back door, saw me pour the snake into the trap, saw the snake squirm out of the trap and head straight for her. Fortunately, the snake was as scared of her as she was of it, and it turned at the last moment. And she still loved me. And Pepe's story reminded me of my father and his final years with Alzheimer's disease. Unable to leave the home without becoming disoriented, asking countless questions, telling the same story over and over and how my mother in turn mothered him as he increasingly became more limited, more needy, more childlike. And it took a toll on her. And as I came to the end of the story, I reflected on my mother as she is now, as she ages with increasing physical limitations, and my concern for her safety and security while I live several states away. I know my brothers live close, but she still lives in her own home, alone, valuing her independence. Pepe's story continues in my mind long after it's been told. And questions come into my mind about the mystery of the mangoes, about her mother's husband of 3 years, of the toll it took on Pepe and as she cared for her mother, of typhoid fever, its impact on Pepe, her mother, Miami. All the stories in the story that were left untold, but still calling to me. And I wondered what it would have been like to be in Pepe's shoes. How would I act, react, cope? And the wondering continues. My story, all my stories, and Pepe's story now are intertwined. And I suspect her story is now intertwined with your stories, and your questions, and your wonderings. Sometimes a story can be engaging, sometimes healing, sometimes it can be triggering. Some of us might not have had a positive relationship with our biological mother, or had what might be described as a complicated relationship with those who mothered us. Some of us crave a mothering figure in our lives, or experiencing a significant change in our relationship with someone who mothered us. And as you hear, Happy Mother's Day, well, it may poke a still healing bruise on your heart. And for that, I'm sorry. Mother's Day is complicated. For many of us, it is too commercial and not really focused on honoring our mothers. And so many of us, well, we honor our mothers all the time and don't need a particularly special day for that. And so I wonder if it's time for us to begin thinking about Mother's Day with fresh purpose or meaning. For instance, did you know that the first Mother's Day was the result of a proclamation written by Julia Ward Howe in 1870? I don't know how many of you know or remember her from your history, but she was an American poet, an author. She wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. She was an advocate for abolitionism and a social activist. She worked for women's suffrage, and she was a Unitarian. She urged women across the world to join the cause of peacemaking. Written in the language of her time, her proclamation held a radical call to create peace that may resonate with you today. She wrote, "Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn what we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We, the mother of one." Perhaps for those of us who want to look at Mother's Day a little differently, as Unitarian Universalists, we could certainly celebrate Mother's Day by working for peace, inspired by our Unitarian forebear, Julia Ward Howe. Or perhaps we could consider Mama's Day. There is such a thing. The first Mama's Day was held in May 2011 and began as a project of the Strong Families Network. The partners in this project included the California Latinos for Reproductive Justice, Young Women's Freedom Center, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equality, Sankofa Collective Northeast, the National Asian Pacific America Women's Forum, the National Latina Institute of Reproductive Justice, Western State Center, and Bold Futures. This first event set the foundation that all other Mama's Days have been built on, uplifting the diversity and beauty of all forms of mamahood. The campaign seeks to reach out and highlight the mamas that the Strong Family Network organizers work with. Folks often overlooked in mainstream celebrations of Mother's Day, including young mothers, working mothers, immigrant mothers, single mothers, incarcerated mothers, mothers struggling with substance abuse. Perhaps there's a story in celebrating Mama's Day that might hold meaning and purpose for you or us this time of year. And I say us because I want us to understand that we are a community. We are collectively a covenantal community. And we are guided by our Unitarian Universalist principles, particularly in this case our principles, the second and third principles that affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, an acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. They remind us that we are not a static faith with static beliefs and traditions, that what we believe is how we believe together. In other words, we decide as equals who we are as a community, who we want to be, how we want to worship, what we choose to celebrate, and how we choose to celebrate special days, traditions, holidays, and holy days. And Mother's Day is just one example of that. Is there a way for us to recognize it? Well, taking into account there are those that Mother's Day is not affirming to them. It is painful, hurtful, troubling. How can we hold meaning and purpose in this community to affirm even that when we think of Mother's Day? As a covenantal community, we support one another in our individual search for truth and meaning. And we seek as a congregation to grow spiritually, however we choose to define that. And our covenant is inclusive of our individual as well as our collective answers to big questions. Like, why do we want this congregation to exist, to thrive, to make a difference in the world? Our covenant with each other is created as we share our stories with one another, as we find meaning and purpose in those stories with one another. The most effective covenants are created consciously in open sharing and in open storytelling so that we create a common story. That's why we had this visioning workshop a couple of weeks ago. So we consciously create the story that forms the foundation of who we are as a spiritual community and why we exist. There are innumerable stories within each of us, including those about our mothers. Some we share, and some we choose not to. But in this congregation, your stories are just as important as anybody else's stories. And please know that we gather in community to accept one another's stories, to be affected by one another's stories, and to better understand who we are, both individually and collectively, through our sharing of stories. I know some of our stories may be difficult to tell. Some may be difficult to hear. But in this community, we respect your stories. And we understand that if you choose to share them with us, they become part of our story. We, as Unitarian Universalists, respect one another's worth enough to hear your pain or your joy. We listen to hear what hurts, and we will love you through to the other side. Stories convey experiences not about talking about, but by opening our hearts and minds in ways that make them capable of experiencing that which cannot be described. One last thing I want to share about Pepe's story. So much of what I heard, and perhaps you did as well, was found in what was not said. Pepe opened up a piece of who she is and how she experiences the world to us. She offered us more than a simple story about feeding her mother mangoes. And if we really listen, aren't all stories not simple stories if we really listen? She offered us an opportunity to experience the ineffable and the profound. She offered connection by sharing her vulnerability, and doing so offered us a heart space to share in our own vulnerability. As I was reflecting on that, I found this passage by Wendell Berry, and it spoke to me. He wrote, "We clasp the hands of those that go before us, and the hands of those who come after us. We enter in the little circle of each other's arms and the larger circle of lovers whose hands are joined in a dance, and a larger seeker of all and a larger circle of all creatures passing in and out of life, who move also in a dance, to music so subtle and vast that no ear hears it except in fragments." the ineffable and the profound, our connection to all stories. When we share our stories with one another, and I hope we will, it's another opportunity to hear that music so subtle and vast that no ears can hear it except in fragments. Blessed be.